have to start on time. We have folks waiting on the live stream as well for us to join. But thank you again for joining us this early in the morning. Not a very convenient time for folks who are not morning people. But thank you again for joining us in this breakfast series. Just to give you the backstory around this, I'm with Workato. My name is Sridhi. I work in product marketing, and Bhaskar, who leads up the marketing team. We started talking about this digital change agent or the head of business systems. So when the initial conversation, Bhaskar is the visionary. He comes up with ideas, and I'm the super skeptic. I said, who are these creatures, head of business systems? I said, these are mythical creatures. I was telling Brian that they don't exist. But back in September of last year, we met, I think, Jitesh, you're one of the founding members. And we started this community. So it all started with the community in the Bay Area. So we started with about 10 people from various high-growth companies. And over the last 9 months, it has grown to about maybe 50 or 60 head of business systems in the community in the Bay Area. And we have about 25 or 30 in New York, and we're kicking it off in Boston sometime later this month or next month. Yeah. So, and part of our learnings from having conversations with Brian, Jitesh, and the likes, we have learned that there's this role is less understood, less appreciated, and even less loved. So if that sounds more of it resonates with your sentiments, the idea of and the other part we learned is because it's less understood, less loved, there's a struggle for this role to create its own brand. And this series is to bring out all the learnings and all the knowledge that each of you have gathered and how you have brought about the change or transformation in your companies, right? And we want to associate with this particular brand or role as a company because we believe, even in Workato, the technology that we bring is about disrupting how business is done, digital transformation is being managed in companies. So that said, just to give you a little more about this event, it's a monthly event. We're trying to get into a cadence of hosting it once every month. The first one we did in February, the head of business systems from Arlo spoke at that. And there are upcoming events where, Eric from Lucidchart, Chris from Elastic, and Kumud from Stitch Fix will be talking. And the topics are already listed. If you're already registered, you will get the email with the details. So do share. Help us grow the community. It's for you, and it's built by you and for you. So help us grow the community. There is about this event. It's while you're attending in person. There's also live streaming. People who are remote, like in New York, Boston, or wherever, they can join from anywhere in the world, and ask questions. It's informal. So the way that we will set it up is probably an hour-long chat session. We'll kick it off with a quick conversation just to get some background from Brian, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So Brian, maybe all of you already know a little about Brian already from your conversations, but he is the head of business systems and data at Fastly. And he has had an interesting journey. This is not his first time he's coming up into this role. You have been in this role with past companies. And as I was all of us have been in different roles at companies, whether you work in IT business or you're in marketing sales. And oftentimes when you have to build a team, there is a playbook. There is a handbook that you can say what kind of people you want to hire, what kind of problems you have to solve. But what we have learned is building the business system team from ground up is a challenge. And Brian has done that multiple times over. So let's talk to him to find out what's the best way to build it.
Thanks. I don't know if I know the best way. I'll tell you what I've done so far. I'm still learning every single day. So a little bit about me. As Trudy said, I'm currently at Fastly as the head of their business systems and data. Before that, I was at GitLab for a while, trying to actually get out of business systems for about 10 minutes, but found that that's impossible. So I took this role as senior director of data and analytics, and quickly found that you still need to fix the business systems, and if you're the only one there to do it, you're doing that too. And before that, I was at OpenDNS through an acquisition by Cisco. Spent a couple years inside Cisco. And then before that, I spent many, many years in healthcare, doing things like implementing electronic medical records, and then building BI and data warehousing on top of that. But that I lost interest in, and was like, hey, this tech thing looks interesting. I'm going to go try that. So
Brian, tell us, tell us a little more about Fastly and like your team at Fastly. What do they do? Just give us an overview to start with.
Sure. So Fastly is an edge cloud delivery network, and so similar to a content delivery network, that's sort of this is an evolution of that industry. Think folks like Akamai, Cloudflare. That's generally our industry. You probably use this every day and don't really think about it. If you read the New York Times, if you listen to Spotify, if you booked something on Airbnb, you're actually using our infrastructure. And we serve up a lot of that content, as well as are starting to push that the compute function out closer to your users to give them a better experience. So for instance, a paywall on somebody's website. We run that out at the edge, and that provides a much cleaner, faster experience for end users. So we've been around since 2011, have a pretty sizable network at this point, 37.5 terabits per second. This is a little bit out of date, but these are the latest public numbers that I could find. 400 billion requests per day. Those are HTTP requests hitting our infrastructure. We optimize images for display on your device, whatever you're using. And that actually provides a much better experience. If you're on an iPhone, sending everyone the same image rather than optimizing it for that iPhone. So we're serving about 360 billion of those per month. We're around the world. Behind this, I kind of superimposed those are all of our points of presence around the world. We've got 6 actual offices in various locations, and we've got a pretty high NPS score. We focus very, very heavily on customer support. It's probably one of the core competencies of the company is working with customers to make them successful. So yeah, that's Fastly. And so I've been there for about a year now. We came up with these vision and mission statements about 4 months ago as part of an offsite where we wanted to define, like, well, who are we as a business systems team? What are the words we want the other organizations to describe us with? And what do we want to live up to? So we said, hey, we really want to make sure that everyone's operating at peak performance within our organization. So that's our vision, is everybody, being super successful, productive, happy at work because it's easy to do their jobs. And we do that by providing the capabilities and information needed for Fastlians to execute the business in the most efficient and effective way possible. So I have 3 organizations under me. Sort of, we'll get into what an organization is. Sometimes it's just a person. Go-to-market systems, which is really our marketing, sales, customer-facing, customer support systems. Our HRIS and financial systems, that's our second pillar. And then our business intelligence and data warehousing pillar. And we're quickly building those. And we sit in the middle of the organization. So I'm sure this is a probably familiar story to all of you, that we are the ones who get to see everything. We support HR, IT, sales, marketing, finance, customer success. And so I think Sri, in the last one of these, put it really well. Like, we're the only ones who see that when a marketing blast goes out, that your support tickets go up. And that's okay. Not really something anyone else is looking at, but we have that visibility where no one else in the organization does, and that creates a lot of power. So yeah, that's where we're at right now.
So Brian, you mentioned you have been with Fastly for a year, And when you started, right, what did the business systems team look like? And I know Fastly is not the only place where you started the business systems team. And what did it look like, and what were some of the challenges?
Sure. So I think it's probably a very familiar story to many of you in here. And I think it's a familiar story, like it's sort of the same story at every company I go to is they start with building a product. It's half a dozen people, maybe a dozen people max, and they're not worried about process. They're not worried about business systems. That doesn't exist. They're trying to get people to pay them for their product. So they don't invest in any of this stuff. They might have a salesperson who goes out and works out of Excel or Word or something. Then eventually they start to get product market fit. And when they get that, they start to introduce processes, and they know what a PO is at that point, and start figuring out their customers are demanding that they're able to do business in ways that the customers support. There's actual contracts that are more mature and actually well thought through. And at some point, they need to raise more money, think about going public. Maybe they're getting acquired. There's some due diligence coming in, and the board says, hey, show us your numbers. And we want to slice and dice them by these 15 different ways. And all the execs go, oh, crap, we don't have any way of doing that. Our systems aren't set up to generate the data that way. We don't store the data. It's not in a data warehouse. We can try and centralize this stuff. We can try and do it in Excel. It takes a month. It's not repeatable. There's a board meeting every quarter, and they don't have enough time to recreate this stuff every. And so that's about when they call someone like me to say, hey, we need to figure out our systems, and we want to get this data. We want to start measuring things. And then I'll go in and say, okay, let's start organizing data and look at what's there and figure out what do we need to do. And usually it's we need to fix the upstream systems like Salesforce and start putting in validation rules and start putting in workflows and putting in financial controls, looking at how data is getting created, and fixing all those systems before you can even think about a data warehouse or a BI platform. And that's, so when I got to Fastly, they were sort of about there. Very similar story, had sort of passed the product market fit, needed to figure out numbers, and had called me because I worked with several folks that are there before at OpenDNS, and they said, hey, we think you can help us with this thing. So they had hired a Salesforce admin. There were two, and that was sort of the extent of business systems. They sort of floated in the organization. There wasn't a real home for them. And it was sort of seen as a thing like, yeah, we got to do that because we need Salesforce to be pretty clean so that we can process transactions. And they had sort of taken over the finance systems a little bit. They didn't. There were two people. So one was really focused on Salesforce. The other one started to get into finance apps and did a pretty good job. But this wasn't formalized. It was just like, hey, this needs to happen. At that point, it's who screams the loudest gets what they need. There's not process and prioritization. And it's not seen as a strategic function. It's very tactically seen. It's like, we got to do this so that we can transact business. And so I saw my job first as coming in and saying, okay, like no one knows how to interact with this team except for like sales ops who yells at them to fix Salesforce constantly. So let's start forming relationships. Let's start talking to all these different functions, and let's figure out what their needs are and what's being met and not being met. And so I went and just met with everybody for about the first 2 to 3 months. I spent every day talking to as many people as I could at every level of the organization. And I generally asked them like 4 or 5 questions. What data do you need? What data do you not have that you wish you had? What are the tools that you use to do your job? And what tools don't you have? And capabilities do you lack that you need to execute a strategy to move this company into to the next place? What are the capabilities that you need to do that? And it's across the board, everybody's different, right? Like accounting is like, we need financial controls. We need to make sure that our financial data is clean and accurate and that there's no chance for fraud. The sales team is like, we need to remove friction from the sales cycle. It's too painful to close an opportunity. It's too crazy to get a sales order out the door. Marketing is like, we don't have anything. Please help us. There's a channel team, and they're like, we don't have anything. We just email each other. And I went around and found some of these, people are smart in these companies, and they're really resourceful and creative, so they're going to figure out ways to do their job, often in ways that don't make any sense when you need to scale it or when you need to create data or analyze it. So a big one was like customer onboarding. Early days, that's always manual, right? Nobody's really got that solved in a B2B company. You often, sorry, lost my train of thought.
No, you're saying, but let's go to the, jump into the, like a lot of the, but there was some very specific challenges in terms of that you mentioned around the process, like the lack of like competence in the team, and a lot of things were outsourced.
Yeah, exactly. So we had this team. They were going around. They weren't specialized in managing ERP. They didn't know much about marketing systems. They had a lot of really good core competencies in Salesforce, but that was kind of it. So the first thing was like, we need an ERP expert. And what they had done is I think a similar story to what most companies do, is they hire consultants. And those consultants come in, and the business relies on them to build core infrastructure for the business. And it's done in silos. The finance team has somebody come in and switch them out from QuickBooks to NetSuite or some other tool invariably. They bring in people to put in Eloqua or Marketo or whatever tool you're using. And Salesforce, somebody calls up Blue Wolf or some other agency to implement that. And they become very dependent on consultants who are there to make money. They're there to build really cool things often that cost a lot of money and don't talk to each other. The people who are giving them their marching orders don't necessarily think about that. The finance team isn't thinking about the fact that their customer data is often created through somebody filling out a marketing form, and that's flowing through Eloqua as a lead, coming into Salesforce, converting into an account, and then getting pushed into the ERP or the billing system. So finance doesn't think about that. That's our job. Coming in and saying okay, we need to flip the paradigm here and start thinking about building these core competencies internally around our own infrastructure. Every company has its uniqueness, right? And what makes it really hard to do our job in it. Sometimes it's their go-to-market plans. Sometimes it's their way that they sell, like their pricing and packaging. That's the case at Fastly. And the consultants that we used built us really great tools for that, but they didn't talk. They just didn't. There was no one having a holistic viewpoint of how does the big picture look, and so that's what I spent a lot of time doing.
So Brian, that's a good point. Like when so each of these business units might have their own teams that's solving their problems separately, and your team's role was to bring that all together, centralize it. So how did you go about doing that?
It was mostly building trust and building relationships to make the functional leaders okay with giving up control. And not only okay with giving up control, but wanting someone who is competent in managing systems and building this infrastructure to do it for them and to take care of some of these problems. And at the end of the day, at this point, especially at Fastly, who I think hit that inflection point and realization a little later than some companies, they have been feeling pain for a long time. They have been trying to bootstrap themselves up, and it's really painful to deal with that kind of success. We've been talking a lot at Fastly about this pain you feel of lack of process, of disorganization, is actually a side effect of really fast growth and bootstrapping yourself for so long. And that success, when we think about it, we often think of the IPO or the acquisition party or some big exit, but it's actually the work and the growth up to that point, which is just a series of different successes that causes a lot of pain. So you start working with these folks and listening to them. I found so much of it was they hadn't been heard. No one had been listening to them that could actually help them solve these problems. So when you start building those relationships and saying, no, I think I can help you solve this. I think I can make this horrible manual process on your team automated and make you more successful and make your employees happier because they're not doing this horrible manual toil work. And that was a huge part of it. And then also sort of starting to change the idea about how we think about consultants to, you are a bandwidth, something that gives us extra bandwidth, not someone who's driving strategy of how we architect our systems. I'm still managing that in a few areas and taking over some of those relationships with consultants. It's a journey. But as we started to do this and we started to deliver, you build that trust. And I had a boss who a few years ago told me, the way you build trust is by doing the same thing, or sorry, not the same thing, by doing what you say you're going to do over and over and over again. And I think that's true for systems as well. Someone on my team just gave a talk at a conference a few weeks ago, and they took that and sort of started applying it to the system. And they're like, I'm a BI person, so no one's going to trust my data unless it does what it's supposed to every single time. And if it's not doing what I say it's supposed to do, then they're going to lose trust in that data. They're going to lose trust in the team. It all starts falling apart. And so once we started delivering, we had one big project that was in progress. It took them about 1.5 years to implement Salesforce CPQ, formerly Steelbrick, for those of you who haven't worked with it in the last couple of years. And it's a monster of an implementation. It's not easy. It's changing your whole business. And we needed that to be successful as our first big project to show this is our stake in the ground. This is our, you can trust us with your stuff. We will deliver. And so we spent a lot of time marketing that and internally as, we are the team that can help do this kind of stuff. We layered on advanced approvals on top of that. We started rolling out a bunch of automation for how sales reps interact with different areas in the company, like giving them Salesforce cases, a button that's like deal help, where anything you need from sales, legal, marketing, whatever you need, let's make them a button, ask them questions, create a case, ship it over to that team, give them a queue to manage, and now we've sort of created a place to generate data that we can use for analysis. That's not an email or Slack or any of the other horrible places that they've done things that you can't measure with that data with. Not that Slack or any of those things are horrible. I love Slack. But it's not a great place if you want to measure data. It's really hard. In fact, we have policies. We can't go download our Slack data because there's private conversations in there. We don't want to breach that trust with our employees. So that was a lot of it had to do with building that trust in relationships.
So Brian, you talked about, like the building the trust, you set up a process, like the meeting with the stakeholders, right? But the other part of that equation is like to deliver that, right? You have to build a team, like offload some of the consulting work, bring that back. So how did you go about building the team from hiring, the skills, and even getting the budget, right, for hiring?
That was that sort of came next. So once we sort of established ourselves as we are a team, we're a go-to resource internally, you can trust us to help you with your business process and technology, then it became, okay, we want stuff from you. And we created this roadmap. We had talked to everybody at that point and sort of presented this back to the organization to say, here's what everybody wants. Here's what I'm hearing from all of your teams. And it wasn't pretty. Because we had that trust, people were very honest with us. And we're like, I don't have the basic data to do my job. Fix that. And so I went back to the organization, to leadership, and said, like, here's what we heard. Here's what I think we need to solve this. We need at least someone who's an expert in managing ERPs and financial systems. We really need a Salesforce architect so that we're taking that architecture internally rather than letting consultants. We did that by actually stealing our architect from one of the consultants, but it's a different story. We didn't have any of that internal knowledge, so we didn't really have much choice there, right? Like when consultants build all your core infrastructure, they're the ones who know how it works, and then they get to bill you for every time they need to fix it or change it or create a SKU because they're the only ones that can do that. So we started bringing those folks in and really starting this knowledge transfer and flipping that paradigm to we build our architecture, we come up with it, They just help us execute and give us more bandwidth. So that was a big piece. And once we went back to the organization, it was like, how fast do you want this? The faster you want it, the more people I need, but that has diminishing returns pretty quick. Also, physically hiring people is hard. You can give me 100 people. I'm not going to be able to hire that in a year. But they were like, you tell us what you need. And I think a combination of everyone feeling heard in the company, that there was someone there that cared, that was empathetic to their problems of trying to get their jobs done, and the pain they had been feeling, and the fact that we could come up with a plan that was fairly detailed, and say, this is what we'll deliver if you give us X, Y, and Z. And they said, you tell us what you need, and it's yours. It's not always that easy. It was a struggle at other organizations where we didn't have a project like that CPQ implementation to make the splash, to say, look, we will deliver. So we needed something like that. At OpenDNS, I think it was a Zora implementation that really crossed that line for us, where there's a massive problem in managing subscriptions in Salesforce. So if you don't have something on top of Salesforce, right, it's not meant for that out of the box. So once we solved that, we got a lot more investment. We got a lot more people. But we needed to make that splash. We needed to make people feel heard, and we needed to build trust. Those are sort of the big key ingredients.
Okay, so Brian, we'll open up to Q&A, but two questions before that. One is, if you look back, I think you're coming up in your year. It's this week, or are you already past the year mark?
I think it's next week.
Okay. So if you travel back in time, what business systems at Fastly looked like when you started, and how it looks today, from two dimensions. One, from the perception of the business stakeholders that your team supports, and the team's morale and identity. How do you contrast the two?
I think that's a big part of this. Is like you're not just creating a team, you're building a team, and I think the difference there is similar to how we build systems, right? A team is just a different type of system made up of people and process and sometimes technology. And starting to think about, I like to build stuff. That's why I do this. And starting to think about, okay, if a team is a system and it's got input, processes, and output, what are the things that we need to, what are those processes in the middle? What do we need to plug? Where are our gaps? And we started to sort of to bring in the folks that I talked about earlier. We centralized BI under me because they were like, you guys have all the data. They were under sales operations before, which is often where it starts, right? Because everyone wants to measure their sales and marketing efforts. So we took that and sort of formed this structure. We use a lot of what we've been calling steering committees, although that sounds so corporate, so we're going to try and come up with a better word for it. Where we get those stakeholders together, they know exactly what's going to deliver. We've come up with this model of like, here's what we're doing right now, here's what we just did, here's what we're going to do next, and then here's what we're going to do after that. And the stuff that's after that is just a long list of backlog, right? And we don't know when we're going to actually get to it. We're just like, this is the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then here's everything after that we're not going to deal with immediately because there's too much to try and organize a 12-month roadmap. And we spent a lot of time actually figuring out our team. How do we want to operate? How do we want the organization to interact with us? What are our rules and norms? As I said in the beginning, like, what are the words we want people to describe us as? Trustworthy, dependable, reliable, what? And then are we living up to those? What are the changes we need to make? And like even down to like, what does our Jira process look like? How do people create tickets? Do we let them go in and reopen a ticket that's closed? And we spent a lot of time figuring out, when it was 2 people, the processes were created for a team of 2. When your team gets to 6, when your team gets to 16, those processes aren't going to work the same way, and you need to sort of constantly be iterating on them to get to a point where they can scale without dictating to your team how they're going to get work done. So I kind of make them come up with it, because I'm not going to tell them how they're going to work in Jira. I don't particularly care as long as I get data that I need. And we spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, what should we change? What do we want to experiment with next week? And just iteratively adding more people and thinking about that as we sort of iterate on our processes. But we literally like take days where we just do offsites and focus on our processes, focuses on Jira, focus on how are we operating with the organization, trying to get to this model where we don't want to be the interface to every single sales rep, right? Like that line shouldn't be every sales rep talking to every Salesforce admin. We want to get to a model where there's this operational conduit between us and each one of these teams. And that person is really focused on understanding the needs and can translate between us and work with us to really develop process and bring everything together.
Okay. So Brian, last question. We were talking to Bali earlier. He's in a situation at Snowflake where you were at Fastly a year back, small team, building that. What are the 3 things that you recommend to folks who are where you were a year ago, how to build teams?
The first thing is you need to build trust with the organization and all your stakeholders and formalize these relationships. And that's critical. If you don't have the trust of those people, it's not going to work. They're not going to trust you to build all of the systems for them. They're going to want to, you'll get into the territory game. Like marketing is going to say like, no, we want to own Eloqua or Marketo or whatever it is. And sales is going to be like, no, we need to control Salesforce. So you need to build that trust so that they're willing to share the control of that with you. The other thing is marketing internally. In order to build that trust and even get in front of people so that they care about what you're doing, I had to leverage my leadership heavily to like put me in front of the company, put me in front of different leadership teams at offsites. Let me talk to them. Let me build trust. Let me show that I have the backing of the executive team and what we're doing, and I'm not just some new guy coming in trying to disrupt their way of life. And then I think really focusing on the core problems and the foundation of what you need to accomplish. And you hear this a lot in startup land, right? Like focus is key. And I think for us, that really meant focus on the core foundational things. Do we have the basic capabilities we need to go to market the way that the executives want to go to market? Can we measure the basics? Do we have a marketing funnel? Do we know what our ROI is on basic marketing spend? And if not, those are the things we need to focus on, rather than I'm a sales rep and I really hate that I have to go through this DocuSign process because I have to click this thing every time, and I don't understand why I have to click this button. And we could save them a click, and that's just not worth saving someone a click. Like when you can't measure your marketing funnel, and really working with those leaders to get them to understand, like, hey, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying we can't do that right now. We'll get to that after, but we need to build core foundations first. So I think relationships, getting that trust, getting some marketing in place so that you're explaining to the organization what this function is, because most people don't know. It's still pretty new.
Right.
As Trudy said earlier, there's no handbook yet. And then focus on foundational requirements.
Thanks.
Sure, thank you.
Hey, we'll open it up for questions. I'm sure there are plenty more.
I worked with Brian earlier, so not always are business intelligence and business systems linked in a single org. Usually they're different. Can you explain why that's beneficial, what advantages you have having the data source and the data analytics being part of the same org?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I promise I didn't plant it, even though Michael now deals with all of the things that I left at Cisco when I left there. We found it was actually a natural evolution at OpenDNS. I was actually initially brought in to build a BI platform, not to build business systems, but it was a requirement for business system or for business intelligence that the systems created the data. And what we found is, as we sort of organically started growing this thing and adding Salesforce admins and developers and starting to build a BI team, there was this incredible power that we had. First of all, we sit in the middle, so we see all the data. No one else has that. But when we started really getting the developers and the admins understanding how their data was being used downstream, and getting the BI folks talking to that systems team and saying like, hey, it would be awesome if you timestamped when XYZ happened, because we could build some really powerful analytics off of that. And that became a really great way to get this relationship, I'm not going to say symbiosis, like working together, that power was really great. And we actually became sort of the like, we would present the numbers at a lot of the meetings because they were like, well, you guys already have them, you built the BI tools. And it got awkward sometimes when like the BI team is presenting the marketing metrics in front of the marketers. But that was sort of that level of trust. It was a central source of truth. It didn't matter who presented it, or it was just, that's the one set of data, so who cares who presents it? And that was really powerful, that relationship between those two and having this holistic view.
Brian, I have a two-part question. I'm looking at your organization. I know you're certainly executing the good number of projects. I don't see any PM or a PMO. I know you did mention about the steering committee meeting, so that's one I'm not seeing on the org.
It's because that role is currently open.
Okay.
I am accepting applications.
Okay.
It is actually, like literally, I have a rec open. I interviewed 2 people for it yesterday. It's something I had to take on myself in the initial.
Okay.
It was something, I think it's something that's critical. I think I found that out at OpenDNS, which I waited way too long before we had our own dedicated PM, and I was like, oh my gosh, this changes everything. I don't have to do all this work myself. No. In the beginning, though, when you're 2 or 3 people, we actually joked about it. We had a PM that was working partially with us, but he ended up leaving us to go to be an agile coach. But it was amazing when we had him. But people would joke, like, why do you have a PM for a team of 2 people? What do you? And as we grew, it's you know, I'm not waiting this time. I'm like, I need a PM there now. And so we've tripled in the last year. We'll triple again this year. But that's my top priority right now, is actually getting a PM in place. So if anyone wants to apply, let me know. I also have 4 other recs open. So
okay, that's we can talk offline on that. The second question is, because I'm looking for the same kind of people. So then let's see what happens there. The second question I have is, I know you had a 1 year came along. I don't know. You did mention that there are only 2 Salesforce admins in sales ops team, and then are you bringing into your team? I'm guessing you already grew a team of maybe 15, 20 people. I don't know, maybe less. Looks like based on. You met so much of your time with the business executives and brought them onto the whole business systems framework. What efforts you have done for your team? Because this change, what you are bringing with the team, what you inherited, is a lot.
Yeah.
What efforts you have put in with the team so that they understand and then they're able to embark on the journey? I
involve them in everything. And for me, just my management style, and Michael can probably speak to this. He probably doesn't want to, though. is I'm a very bottoms-up manager, and I've found that the people I hire are generally highly motivated, highly skilled, and really, really smart. And so I didn't come in and dictate to them, hey, we're going to make these changes. It was like, hey, what's working, and how do we think we can incrementally improve this? I take an approach of often like asking people questions to try and bring them to the answer that I already have in my head that I want them to make. And you might call it manipulation, but it works. That was a big piece of it. And like literally taking the time. I think when you're in go, go, go mode all the time, which we often are in the startups, it's really hard to say like, we need to stop and we need to focus on sprint retros and solution design reviews and those things that always get dropped when you're too busy to actually do those things, but make you better as a team. And so we've been working on this. It's an ongoing process, but we're good at it now, where we won't let a sprint go where we're not retroing and doing solution reviews, and really getting those processes in place about, okay, like team, how do you want to deal with this now? We're going to add this next person. Like, how do you want your job to change when we bring a PM in? Because when we don't have it, it's often me or the admins or the architects who are sort of filling all these gaps of BSA, PM, all of these roles that like, my HR person, one of my HR people pinged me the other day because I was posting this rec and they were like, what's the Radford code that matches this rec? And I was like, there's not one, like here's a stack of like 15 that this person's going to work on, but it's not, we're still in multiple hat stage, and I think we will be for some time, but I also think that there's power in that, right? Like, I don't want anyone on my team to be just a Salesforce admin. I want them to be a Salesforce admin that understands the upstream and downstream implications.
Hi, Brian.
My name is Mano. I'm pretty much in the similar situation. I just joined Databricks a couple of months ago, and they don't have anybody to really lead the business systems and everything, as you said. Each business unit is driving through consultants. And right now, how do we really break the silos, right? Because business has a lot of control, what they want to do in their systems. Now, slowly, I'm trying to get into onboard, streamline the process, and sometimes, right, it's very to take the control away from what goes into the system versus the business requirement.
That's that trust building process, and I spent a lot of time focusing on the impact of consultants owning this. Often it's straight a financial problem, and what ends up happening is, and no offense to any consultants, I think they're a very powerful tool when used correctly, but they will build you a really complex tool for $1 million if you let them. And what I found is when we looked at the budget and the spend on what we were doing externally, I was like, I could build a pretty solid team with the same amount of money or less. And that was a pretty compelling argument to make. And once you get the CFO on your side with spend, you've got it made. But the other side is really listening to people. Spend most of your time in the beginning talking, building relationships, understanding what the day-to-day problems that they're facing are. And I found just listening, like they'd never had anyone that sat there in a room for an hour and listened to them complain about their job. And that gave me a lot of, like, that earned me a bunch of trust that I was empathetic to their pain.
Yes, one of the other problem is, all business has their own budgets and they are going to buy products separately, which is, they used to that culture of, going and buying, talking to the consultant, get connected to the system, and they're still doing it. But again, you don't want to immediately block them from doing, this buying new. We are trying to put together an evaluation process for everything you already buy, but still, they know the legal, they know the, CISO, everybody, they'll send a form and, okay, this is what we are buying, get it approved. Sometimes it's really difficult to really drive that process.
Absolutely. Especially in small companies, every team gets their own budget. Often they have a credit card and they've gone and bought some SaaS tool on the credit card. I spent a bunch of time convincing the CFO that, and the accounting folks that was a really bad move to let them go so rogue. And that it created security implications because those tools were not vetted by our security teams. It had a whole bunch of really bad manual processes because people were working in silos. And I said, we need to, if we can control the spend and we can get some sort of financial approval in there and get them to say, hey, before you go spend this money, why don't you come talk to me and see if there's already a tool we have that does this? Or we have a set of questions and we're working on this. This is vendor management and your procure to pay process is always a massive thing it's one of our next big undertaking. And figuring out, what are the questions we can ask to make them realize that this is not, they're not just buying a tool, they're kicking off an implementation that they're probably not prepared for. And that if they are letting the consultants that they're going to hire to build that stuff, build core infrastructure and manage strategy, that you're giving up strategic control of part of your organization to external people. And that scares executives. And when we started framing it that way, that look, you're spending too much money, we're losing all of our institutional knowledge, it's going to consultants that are going out into the ether, and we already have a bunch of these tools. There's 15 different project management tools that are throughout the company. We got a lot of buy-in from the CFO there, and really helped us sort of rein this in and get control of it.
So one of the things what you said, one is the financial aspect of it. Other think about it, right? You give candy to your kid, you take it away from them. Do they feel happy?
Bali, if you don't mind, can you use the mic? This is making a difference online.
Sorry. It's almost taking away candy from your kid. They're never going to be happy. Control is like that, right? At the end of the day, okay, you took away the candy. What's in it for them? What's the carrot in front of them? That's the way, if you play that, then it just kind of becomes easier. You're not taking the candy away from them. You're saying, I'm replacing a candy with something else. What that something else translates to is what every leader has to figure that out. It changes from an organization to organization. In our example, marketing, we said, I don't want to touch you. We said, keep it. I'm happy the way you are. But there are aspects of marketing that falls under the enterprise umbrella rather than just marketing. And then they say, like, OK, makes sense. Take it away from me. They still own the entire marketing system. We don't even own it. And that's totally OK. That works for us.
Yeah, similar situation. I mean, marketing is running their own silo.
Yeah.
That's the way it is for now. We said when we are ready to give something, probably we'll drive that.
We showed, I have a good example of this is our HR systems. I had a meeting on Wednesday of this week where, I think it was Wednesday, maybe it was earlier, it's all a blur, where they basically said, we want you guys to run with this. We want your team to own the marketing systems because it's not working. And pointing out the potential benefits of letting us run with all of their projects, like we know how to run systems projects. That's what we do, and that's not what HR people do. And so we talked a lot about like, hey, why is it that somebody's not in the HR system until the day they start, when we need to provision accounts in some places very manually, and we need days notice, and we could automate it through like Okta if we had the data in the HR system syncing down, had the Okta group set up, provisioning out and giving permissions, but we can't because the data is not in the HR system in time for that to happen, so we manually generate all these accounts, and then on the day they start, Okta syncs it all together, but we still don't really have the data we need, and it's not automated, and it's a massive pain point for my team and IT and HR and potentially compliance when you start talking about onboarding and offboarding employees and who has access to data. So it was one of those things where we showed them, here's what, to your point, here's what you get when we do this, and make that more compelling than the pain that they're feeling today.
Always frame it as a value proposition for the customer, right?
Yes, exactly. It's always a value prop.
In sales or in systems.
Yeah, it's like I think our role has like, we have to be marketers, salespeople, customer support people. We're sort of all of that and engineers in one embodiment that supports all of this internal customers.
I have a question. Alec Davis, I'm also a director of business systems. You answered the question I was going to ask, actually. What is your procurement process to buy a piece of software? The struggle I run into a lot is, you have a new leader come in or somebody in marketing that has this great tool. They used to use it at the last company. They really want you to use it. And you look at your infrastructure, you see that it doesn't fit, or you already have the tool. How do you talk to the leadership in those departments to tell them why that system's not going to work or how it's going to ill affect your architecture, your systems? It's
back to that sales and marketing hat. And I've run into this before where like the partner team went and bought ImPartner, which is a pretty monster partner platform, partner portal platform, and where the channel program was not very mature, and they're like, yeah, it's sitting there. And it was like a year and a half into the contract, and it's still nothing. It was sitting rotting. And so I was like, look, you clearly need business systems help to make this thing work. You can't plug it into Salesforce without us. So we don't think this is the right solution. It wasn't. Like when you have a quoting tool that is so complex, you can't ship that to some other tool and let partners create quotes. So it was like, because we were a CPQ shop, it was Salesforce or nothing. Like there's no option there. But I can't frame it that way. So what I did was talk about trade-offs of the different things that you'll get or won't get with if you let us run this. And you kind of do it in a way that's like selling and not as like, I'm sort of reluctantly to take on, like I never asked for the HR systems. I'm kind of scared to death of it. But like
me as well.
yeah, once we had built the trust, they were like, you guys are going to be better at this than us, so please run with it. And you know, I've done enough fake it till you make it. This is not recorded, right? Where I'm confident that we can run with those projects with the right folks in place. And I said, you know, we'll take this, but we also need an HR systems expert on our team.
I try to stay away from any HR system or anything to do with comp.
Yeah.
That's the hairy kind of a follow-up question. So you have your different departments there. I'm assuming they're all, in those departments are all admins. What do you look for? Is it just an admin, or is it somebody who has like skills in that particular department, like the go-to-market systems? Is it somebody who is like a Marketo admin, but also understands marketing as a whole?
Yes, I think that for our function and the way that it's evolved outside of IT often, and as part of a business function, I think understanding the business is critical to this function. And I have a really good example of this. When we were implementing CPQ, and we were demoing it out to like the sales leadership and our legal leadership because they're very interested in the contract process and the sales orders. We started demoing and we were creating quotes that didn't make sense to the business. So, and the salespeople couldn't get past that. Also, the head of legal was like, "This is not a real deal. This is not how we sell." And it was just because the admins didn't really know. And they weren't caring about that. They were like, no, I'm demoing this, how this other product works in the quoting tool.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to show you how a real deal works. And when we changed that and started saying, okay, well now when we demo this thing, we're going to take the last 3 orders that processed and we're just going to build those and demo them.
Yeah.
And that changed our engagement and earned us so much more trust. And like, we stopped spending time talking about like why this wasn't a real deal in the demo and started talking about the actual capabilities.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
I have a question. So, you know, in fact, we were talking on our way over, Jitesh and I. So once you have built the trust and you start getting projects coming in, at some point in time, there are just way too many coming from business, and then you are resource constrained. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that situation?
I think that's where consultants do come in handy, is to give you enough bandwidth to complete whatever project is ahead of you. But you need to be really, really cautious about the maintenance that it's going to entail. So if you're buying something like InPartner, where you don't just stand up InPartner, you've got to admin it, and you need a dedicated resource to manage a partner portal, then it's a really bad idea to use consultants because they're going to come in, build it, implement, and take that institutional knowledge and run away. And I think that making sure that you are retaining the institutional knowledge, you are running the strategy and the architecture, it gives you a freedom to increase bandwidth when it's only needed temporarily. But if you really need the permanency, I've now, like as part of our procurement process, we've sort of started to include those questions. What does this take to manage? What does it take to implement? What are your plans to do that? To really have that conversation with the finance team and my leadership to say like, this team wants this tool and we're going to have to maintain it, and it's going to like, if we just buy this and we don't increase our resources, here's the other projects that are going to suffer. And they're like, oh, we can't have that. So here's more people. It's really just like making sure that all the leadership is aware of the different trade-offs. And that has gotten me most of the headcount that I've needed until you start hitting the really large organization where they're focused on efficiency, and then you have to worry about that. That's when I leave. That's when I'm like, I want to be a growth company where they just invest a lot in this stuff.
So one follow-up on that. So, and for those projects, typically do the business teams sponsor those projects in the sense they provide the budget, or how is that handled?
Yeah, right now they provide the budget because mostly at the companies this size, they don't have the capabilities to do cross-charging or step-down accounting very well. So, well, they provide the budget for the tool, and if there's consulting work that needs to come in, if it's a headcount, it just comes out of our out of our side, but we're still early enough that we're not too constrained from that perspective. Like, we don't break down the budget to a point where we worry too much about cross-charging, or we had to get this headcount because of this project. We'll get there, but right now we're at the size where we don't worry too much about that yet. And also, they realize, like, the lack of investment and the underinvestment in this function. They realize that the hole that they've created, that we're trying to dig out of, is so massive that if we can really simply justify what we're trying to do, they've been really supportive and invested.
So Brian, have a quick follow-up on that. Can you talk numbers in terms of, how many applications, tools there's in Fastly ecosystem? What percentage of that you guys manage? And you didn't really specify a number of team members on yours, so then that's kind of all related.
I think I can talk about that. I'm trying to be careful about numbers. We started at 2. We're 6 right now with 5 open, and there will be. We will once we fill those, we'll probably double again by the end of the year. So it's a lot of hiring. I spend about 2 hours a day in interviews right now. It's fun. From an application standpoint, I think we're probably around 65 applications throughout Fastly. We manage about 45 of them, I think. And we're sort of taking on more. We have conversations about different areas of the business all the time. Where we don't manage, the only places really where we don't have much input is in the engineering org. They sort of manage their own worlds with all their massive tools their massive amount of little tiny tools that they put in their set. I think GitHub is sort of the where that starts. Like, we don't touch GitHub, although we are in it, and I think more business systems teams need to start using GitHub to source control things, especially in the BI and analytics world. But that's a different talk.
I'm going to put this table on the spot. No questions from this table. Anyone has a question? Folks from GitHub? Okay.
Sorry. On the communication style to the business, do you just talk to each business separately, or is it broadcast to the rest of the business?
It's both. So right now I have and I iterate on this constantly, but I switch off. I meet with everybody every 2 weeks, and the way that it's working right now, some groups I meet with weekly, like sales I meet with weekly. I have a CPQ steering committee that's weekly, where we just discuss that area's priorities. Like, I want to know I have a stack of tickets from sales. I have a stack, and we use tickets for projects for everything. So I have a stack for each different stakeholder group. So I go to meet with each one individually to prioritize their swim lane. And then I do this thing called, we call it BOSS. It's Business Operations Systems and Stuff, that we do every other 2 weeks, where we get everybody together. And I say, here's the cream from each team's prioritization. And this is what we're going to deliver over the next 6 weeks. And here's what we did the last 6 weeks. And it gives us the opportunity to really do the horse trading, where they say, hey, I had this project. I don't see it on the board. I need to have it done by this date because we're going to launch something, or some event's going to happen. So that gives the opportunity for them. Like, everybody's usually pretty professional and adult. Sometimes it gets a little spicy, but they'll say, I got to do this, and that means I got to pull something else off the board. And I'll propose things. Say, this project is about the same size as these two. If we pull these two off, are you, marketing or sales or whoever those are you okay if we push this out for another month? And they'll usually say, yeah, but if you do that, you need to do these 4 other things for me in that month as well. And then I'll say, okay, that means that the other team that we're going to push something in for, you're going to be out for a little while after I do this. And we just sort of horse trade. And doing that in a room full of people where everybody's on the same page about knowing what's going to be delivered is really, really powerful. They all come away feeling like they were heard, their stuff is prioritized, and they were given the opportunity to yell about something that they really wanted to.
Hey there. I'm playing off a question Michael asked our table, and I'm curious about how important you think it is, but where you sit within the organization. So, for example, Intercom's grown in the year that I've been there from 400 to 650. We got the headcount for the team and the budget sitting under sales because the whole sales hierarchy had come from LinkedIn. They had a huge sales ops organization. But when we get into this diagram, we understand that we want those integrations, budgets for that, and that's a much bigger ask to own those tools?
That's a really good question. I think what really matters, I think one is it's really important that you're viewed as an independent third party. And so it doesn't matter so much where you sit as long as you can establish that. I have reported, as I'm sure many of you have experienced this, to just about everybody and every function. Currently, I report to the General Counsel and SVP of Trust, which is the most unique sounding place where this function would report. It works, though, because the leader of that team has been involved in every single deal that the company's done and has a better operational understanding because of that than just about anybody in the org. So it worked. I've also, my most successful, sorry, Lou, if you're listening, it's not, place was the CMO under Jeff Samuels at OpenDNS, where I had a champion, and that was the most critical piece. So it wasn't so much where I sat as much as was I able to maintain this sense of independence from the rest of the organization, that I wasn't, didn't have my finger on the scale for marketing or sales, or if they ever got into some back and forth. But that the key was really that I had a strong champion at the C level. And I've also been under, the CFO is often where they put us, and that has actually been my least successful champion, mostly because they generally aren't operational, and they don't necessarily understand the operational challenges. But where I am now, I have a really great champion at Fastly, and it's in an odd area to external people when I tell them that I report to the GC. But it works because of that support, and because he's able to get me in front of the company, in front of other leaders, and sort of let me do the marketing, as well as he does some of it himself. Although right before he was presenting to at all hands this week on a topic, he was like, "Hey, will you do this slide for me?" And I was like, I have 1 minute to prepare. No, you're doing it. So that was really the key, is more about the champion than who it was or where in the org.
If you could share, what are the MBOs that you're measured against, or how do you, upon at the end of the year, look back and say to your sponsors, look at all the stuff that we achieved?
It depends on the project. So with CPQ, for instance, it was, can we get a sales order out the door faster? Because what was happening before we did CPQ was it was done through Aptus, the CLM tool. They were generating sales orders in there, basically from a Word document. You could put anything in a Word document. And then when you need to implement an actual quoting tool, you're like, oh crap, there's no data. It's all sitting in PDFs, and you have to parse through every PDF to figure out what the heck they sold, because they get real creative, right? Like, we're gonna include the first 10 requests for every 6 gigabytes that come through the system, and then you're like, how do I quote that? So for that one, we really focused on the end goal of this is we need to get sales orders out faster, and it's really, really painful for the legal team to generate sales orders in Aptus. So we took that from 2 weeks down to 15 minutes in CPQ, or maybe not 2 weeks. In really hairy deals, it can take that long, but usually, max or at least 3 to 5 days to get a sales order out. On the finance side, it was a lot of manual processes. So it was really about, can we limit the headcount growth in that area by automating a bunch of their jobs, a bunch of the pieces of their jobs, and sort of elevate them to do higher level work. And that one's a little harder because it's more long term. And how do you measure something that hasn't actually happened? Like, you're measuring a negative. You're saying if the headcount doesn't grow, I'm successful. But understanding and making it like clear to my leadership that this is the outcome we expect. We expect that you don't need to hire more people manually entering sales orders into the billing tool because we've automated that through an integration. And they'll say, yeah, that makes sense. I'm in. And if we do that, and then they're like, yeah, they automated it. We didn't have to hire anyone else to do that anymore. That was a big win. But yeah, it really depends project by project. Then there's BI. BI is a little different in that you have real metrics of who's logging in and viewing what and how often. And it's sort of a different challenge where BI is one of the few places in the organization where I think top-down works really, really well. If you go to an executive and you build them a dashboard and they're holding their team accountable to those numbers, you better believe their team is going to log into that dashboard every day and look at what their boss is looking at and holding them accountable to. And then that flows down through the org. And so you actually have like real solid metrics there to say like, all right, you know, when your CFO is logging into your BI tool first thing in the morning every day, you are successful in your BI program, like, because everyone's going to flow down from that. Does that kind of answer?
Thank you.
I think maybe one last question, if there is any. You're pretty much on time. Yep.
I know you kind of mentioned you have 6 people and you have started to grow. In your growth on the business systems, what's the plan around the on-site, offshore, any combinations of thinking in that aspects, and consultants too?
Yeah, I think right now we're at a point where I'm hiring based on the biggest pain point and the biggest hole that I have, and trying to sort of, right now that's project management and program management. So I don't think too far out because our world is going to be entirely different in 6 months from now, where I'm overcorrecting a little bit on trying to get things done internally and not use outsourced consulting, mostly because we really need to build these core competencies about not so much like Salesforce. Like we know Salesforce, we know how to run it really well. We have great people. What we really need core competency in is how to do business as fastly in Salesforce. How to market fastly. Like how does our marketing team use the marketing tools? That's what we need to build a core competency in. So I'm sort of pulling back, but I also think, you know, there are times where we need to deliver quickly, and there's no better way to do it than just giving a bunch of money to consultants to come in and fill gaps. I also think Salesforce development is an area where it is so hard to find a really good Salesforce developer and hire them. I've had one open, I think, for 8 months, and really trying to find the exact right person. And that is something that we can pretty easily offshore, but I also don't want to do it too much, and I want to bring that in-house. It's just a matter of like finding the right folks and being able to deliver at the same time.
Thank you, Brian.
Sure.
Mince, I have one housekeeping before we all leave. You know, we have a survey out, and it's mainly very simple. Mince, does this time work for everyone or not? If you would prefer evening hours, you know, we are all open. Since we are doing this the second time, just wanted to get feedback from you all. And then the next one that we'll be doing is with Lucid Charts, and it'll be in Millbrae, San Mateo area, close to BART station, and Caltrain, so that people can commute easily to that. And that'll be the 3rd of May. So if you're interested in that, if you can just mark it, we'll take care of it from there.
Brian, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And learning so much about the mythical world I didn't know about. Thank you again for joining us and sharing your experience.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.